type checking in a way behaves as a network switch. We can call it instead a contextual switch because it tells us the state of the network flow we encounter at the moment it reaches a watcher or a sensor. I'll review the previous sections where I went over the zookeeper watcher module for reference. In this case, we're going to abstract the express session cookie into a larger scope of React type checking without using flow. In fact, using an older React implementation of type checking. We fetch a set of metrics from the data stream. Then we program a set of flux actions in a directed acyclic graph. That's a one loop fetching of network data such as CPU, memory, and so forth, and then setting that information into a dashboard. We've also discussed how you can embed a Bloom filter into this transaction to further secure the communication between the client and the server. Furthermore, in upcoming sections, we should discuss the art of visualizing data. But in this section, we'll do a Prometheus, Grafana, invariant or compatible session that will explain to you the idea behind the cluster store. Now, the cluster store gives the express session cookie embedded availabilities and proficiencies in tracking data. Data that becomes context when discussing an express server. What do we mean by this? Well, first, let me define a set of stateful constants or cluster constants, which will be inherited from the cluster constants class. We're going to export a set of states that defines the modality of the Mesos cluster as it is. What do we mean by the modality of the cluster? Well, by calling a refresh stats function that takes in an assigned stats object or an instance or a singleton of this stats containing parameters such as CPU, memory, bandwidth, availability of all of those variables. We're able to narrow down specifically when a session was started and to begin reporting on this session by instantiating a stateful automata, an array of nodes and frameworks and tasks, a specific leader, and a ping or a PID for that specific query. We instantiate the logs as an object. More on this later. The cluster store implementation will allow us to extract or to cleave the data at hand that is of interest to us. So, for example, if we were to discuss streams per second, we would in fact be looking at, well, the memory that is free in terms of bytes, the total bytes, the percentile of the CPUs being used, and all of these are found inside the Mesos strata for both the master and the slave. The dispatcher sends out a packet of information. The action type is defined as either containing a stateful cluster refresh, and the cluster refresh will simply renew the contract for that cookie and give us the information that is being divulged by calling the stats object inside a fetch. The stats object is thus linked specifically to a timestamped IID or a session ID, inheriting the express or the expressfulness of the application. So the action type is actually a cluster constant function that refreshes the logs, the stats, and so forth.